What's better, Counter-Strike or Valorant? I'm guessing you have an answer to that already, depending on your proclivities. If you lost a year of school to COVID-19, you probably think it's Valorant by a mile. And if you think Valorant is a child game with cartoon graphics to make kid player happy like children's show, you probably think that only a moron wouldn't say Counter-Strike. Well, whichever demographic you belong to, there's a reason you already have an opinion on it. Both games are part of the first-person shooter genre, which also happens to be one of the most popular multiplayer gaming genres in the world. And everyone who regularly plays an FPS knows one thing. Their favorite one is the best one.
Overwatch.
Rainbow Six.
I'm so biased, I'm gonna say Counter-Strike.
Okay, obviously it's silly to claim that your favorite FPS just happens to be the best one because you like it. Logically, you know there's no way to objectively prove that. Even if, underneath that logic, you're privately thinking that yours really is the best. But even though it's impossible to empirically claim that one FPS is superior to all the others, there's another metric that FPS players tend to care about. One that may supersede the title of best FPS because it's a matter of pride. Which FPS is the hardest? Sadly, this question isn't quite so simple either. The diverse range of FPS games means that it's very difficult to compare any two games without establishing a million caveats. There are only two requirements for an FPS. One, that you move your character through a 3D space from a first-person point of view, and two, that you shoot people with your gun. Or, whichever weapon your character has on hand. It's usually a gun. Once you hit these two requirements, basically anything goes. Even within the FPS genre, there are subcategories like tactical shooter, hero shooter, and arena shooter that retain the same core design principles but play very differently in practice. Still, there's one thing that each game has in common. Your level of skill in any given FPS can be roughly gauged by how good you are at shooting things with your gun. To use a highly technical term, it's how good your aim is. The better your aim, the better you tend to be at taking down opponents, which means the better your chances are at winning. When you're evaluating how good someone is at an FPS, aim is often the first thing you look at, because it's so easy to parse and so intrinsic to the genre.
Jumping casually into the side, he's gonna fall down again. What is this touch from Simple? Are you serious?
Even if you don't necessarily understand everything that's going on, watching someone's crosshair snap onto targets with pixel-perfect precision is usually a pretty good sign that you're watching a high-level player. So if we're looking to weigh the difficulty of each popular online FPS against each other, and the only skill-based factor that all of them have in common is aiming, then that seems like a good point of comparison. But even if you can usually identify good or bad aim once you see it, the actual practical mechanics of aiming in an FPS are a mystery to most people. So before we start pitting these games against each other, let's establish one thing first: what aim actually is. What does it mean to have good aim? Your instinct might be to say, well, you either have it or you don't, right? And obviously you know it when you see it. When a CS player hits a falling op shot, or when an Apex player one-mags a moving target, or when a COD player hits that classic 360 no-scope. But what actually creates those moments? What allows these players to hit those shots? Aim isn't just some gift that a higher power decided to bestow upon you at birth, after all. When you're born, you have a pretty limited skill set, and last I checked, moving a mouse with the exact precision required to shoot virtual targets on a computer screen wasn't on that list. Oh, yeah, for simplicity's sake, we're going to be focusing on mouse aiming in this video. A lot of the same principles do apply to controllers, though. Much like playing an instrument, aim is something that anyone can learn and refine with time and practice. Sure, some people have a more natural inclination towards it than others, but it's not magic. Anyone who's willing to put in the work will see the results. To understand what actually goes into it, we can break it down into two categories: physical skill and psychological factors. Whenever you're aiming, it may feel innate and subconscious, but these things are actually working together to determine how accurately you're going to be shooting the bad guys. Let's get into the first and arguably most obvious one. Aim is, in no small part, a matter of hand-eye coordination. Having to make accurate movements and micro-adjustments both in response to and in anticipation of stimuli on your screen requires a degree of precise control over your body, or, well, at least your arm. Gripping a mouse isn't exactly an action that comes naturally to the human body. I mean, I highly doubt our ancestors were moving rocks around in a cave like this. Over time, everyone tends to discover aim habits that work best for them. Some of them even get a little weird about it. But the most well-known stylistic split when it comes to the physicality of moving a mouse is wrist versus arm. Wrist aiming uses the smaller muscles in the wrist, which allows for quicker adjustments and is easier to fine-tune, but is less sustainable in the long term, since it puts a lot more strain on said muscles. Arm aiming, on the other arm, uses the larger muscles further up in the arm, which is more sustainable but requires wider movements. The best aimers will be good at blending both styles and switching between the two situationally.
You can think of it like handwriting. The fingers and wrist do the writing, and the arm puts the hand where it needs to be on the page.
The way you physically aim is also impacted by factors such as in-game sensitivity and DPI, which stands for dots per inch. Simply put, the higher your sensitivity, or DPI, the more your cursor will move for any given physical movement of the mouse. The combination of DPI and in-game sensitivity is known as effective DPI. This is probably the area where you'll find the most variance among FPS players. It depends entirely on their personal preference and aim style. Counter-Strike Pro Twists plays with an effective DPI of 636, for example, whilst Elige, another CS pro, plays with an effective DPI of 1184. Both are considered to be at the very top of their fields aim-wise, so there's really no one-size-fits-all here. The speed-accuracy trade-off theory, which goes far beyond gaming and can be applied to practically any living creature, states that after a certain limit point, as speed increases, accuracy must decrease. Very good FPS players have a higher limit point relative to the average person, but they're still subject to the trade-off, so they're always looking for ways to mitigate it. At Gamescom 2023, researchers conducted a study with 63 event attendees who were asked to play 10 minutes of a game of their choice. 32 picked an FPS, 16 picked a MOBA, and 15 picked an adventure game. The FPS players who took part in the study by and large moved their hands with much greater acceleration and deceleration magnitudes compared to the MOBA and adventure game players. They also moved their hands over a greater distance, with some reaching a total of 39 meters over just 10 minutes. Ultimately, the study found that FPS players were far more likely to choose a low sensitivity, which resulted in a lot more overall movement. Basically, they found that it's more beneficial to use wider movements when aiming in FPSs because errors are less extreme and easier to correct. Another physical adjustment that FPS players like to talk about is mouse grip, a concept that kind of explains itself. The three major mouse grip types are palm, fingertip, and claw. It might come as a disappointment to some of you, though, that according to a 2024 study from New Mexico State University, the type of grip didn't actually seem to impact performance results very much. Still, even though how you grip your mouse doesn't have much impact, how well you grip it does still matter. The same study saw a group of Valorant players doing a hand training program twice a week for 6 weeks, with the goal of increasing strength and dexterity. Afterwards, when compared to a group that didn't do the exercises, the training program group's in-game aim was found to have improved significantly. So, with every movement of a mouse, there are actually a ton of physical factors all working in tandem. You've probably heard of one or two of them, especially if you're an FPS player looking for a quick and easy way to get good, though there isn't really an objectively best setup. But the physical side of aiming is just one piece of the puzzle. It goes hand in hand with another pillar that is less talked about, but is just as important. So, you've mastered the usage of a mouse. You can move that cursor around the screen like nobody's business. Now it's time to hop into game and dominate the server. Although, wait, suddenly everything is moving around in unpredictable ways, and you're having to move around too, and you don't know where the enemies are coming from, and you're starting to think that maybe just being good at moving your mouse isn't all there is to this whole aiming stuff. In an FPS, you're never going to be sitting still and shooting at unmoving targets. A big part of aiming is responding to visual stimuli, both expected and unexpected. This is what tends to set pro players apart from amateurs, the ability to adapt their attention processes to each situation. Think of it this way. If you're a tactical FPS player, you'll know that every game has a limited number of maps. Each map has a unique layout that allows players to take unique angles in fights. Being aware of every angle that an opponent might take is an important part of overall strategy, and allows you to position your crosshair accordingly to catch anyone who might suddenly appear. Alternatively, think of shooters that rely more heavily on movement and tracking. Anticipating how different characters tend to move and which abilities they have access to allows you to follow them more accurately with your crosshair. As an esports team that competes in multiple different FPS titles, we've done a good amount of research on this front. Alienware helped us run some tests on our pros across different genres, and we found that FPS players excel at responding to uncued stimuli, aka targets popping up on their screen with no prior indication. They also tended to slightly favor accuracy over raw reaction time, as opposed to MOBA players who showed better reaction time but less accuracy as a result. Basically, a crucial part of aiming is understanding what exactly you're aiming at. Experienced FPS players are not only good at responding to visual stimuli, they're also good at parsing which ones are important and which ones can be discarded. This cognitive process is called visual attention. Visual attention is divided into two parts: top-down attention and bottom-up attention. Top-down attention involves internal guidance of attention based on prior knowledge and future goals. This is what's going on in your brain when you check a corner in Valorant with your crosshair at head level because, based on prior experience, you expect to see an enemy hiding there. Bottom-up attention, on the other hand, is a more stimulus-driven attention directed at things that pop up. It's thought to be more of an external phenomena than top-down attention, since it's not necessarily controlled by the individual. Going back to the Valorant metaphor, it's like when you're just minding your own business when suddenly a jet jumps over your head and you have to swing your mouse wildly to try and catch her. The psychology of aiming in FPSs is not quite muscle memory, but it's not muscle memory either. When you play an FPS, you have to immerse yourself in the world of the game until moving around and aiming in it becomes second nature. A more technical way of putting this would be playing in a state of constant prediction. If we consider aiming to be how good you are at aligning your crosshair with a target, then it's only natural that a big part of it is actually understanding and anticipating where that target is going to be. So, we've covered the two most important parts of aim. There are external factors too, of course. PC gaming is inherently a pay-to-win pursuit, which means a better computer will generally lead to better performance. Someone playing on a $3,000 rig will probably have an easier time of it than someone else of equivalent skill playing in windowed mode at 20 FPS on their Lenovo ThinkPad. This is based on a true story. Plus, the server latency when playing online is something that's completely out of your control, which is why I hit that on LAN is always a valid excuse. Anyway, having laid down this foundation and established these criteria, it should be a lot easier now to compare FPSs to one another in as objective a way as possible. When figuring out where to start with FPSs, there's really only one game that can be considered the quintessential FPS. Counter-Strike's reputation gives it a kind of prestige in the genre, and it's been around for so long that it's incredibly hard for newcomers to break into the upper echelon, so let's start there. As a tactical shooter, Counter-Strike is built around executing plans and preparing for different scenarios. As such, map awareness and crosshair placement are crucial parts of aiming. You'll notice that the best CS players are constantly ensuring that their crosshairs are always in the most advantageous position, depending on what they expect from opponents. Micro-adjustments are fairly important in CS, owing to how the character movement and gun spray patterns work. For example, you might be holding an angle with the expectation that the enemy will jiggle peek, but they end up making a wide swing instead, which means you now have to make a quick and precise adjustment to win the duel. CS's movement system also makes it so that characters retain some velocity even after you let go of the movement button, which lends some extra depth to the movement system. CS players have to learn to counter-strafe, which is where you stop your velocity by tapping the opposite movement button. This is important because your gun will only be fully accurate if you're standing completely still. Remember how we opened the video? Let's do a real comparison now. Counter-Strike versus Valorant. Valorant is also a tac shooter that was clearly heavily inspired by CS, but plays out quite differently. For one thing, Valorant characters don't retain their velocity. Their movement stops as soon as you let go of the movement key. This makes it a little simpler, both to place your crosshair on an opponent and to aim accurately after you stop moving. For another, and probably more obvious thing, on the face of it, Valorant has a lot more going on than Counter-Strike. In Counter-Strike, every single character has access to the exact same items, from guns to mollies to smoke grenades. In Valorant, every character can buy the same guns, but no two characters have the same abilities. Sure, there are multiple characters who can put down smokes and multiple characters who can send out flashes, but each of these smokes and flashes function uniquely and every character's kit is different. There are also characters with wild movement abilities like Jet and Waylay, and characters that can send out deployables like Skye and Killjoy. All this to say, crosshair placement is still important in Valorant, but there's a lot more to take into account, especially considering the different traversal and zoning abilities. Instead of just always keeping your crosshair at head height, aiming in Valorant requires you to be aware of many more different possibilities and tends to reward more creative thinking. So, between these two-tack shooters, which one is harder? Is it harder to make micro-adjustments to account for spray control and slippery movement? Or is it harder to keep your crosshair in the right spot while also keeping track of the enemy team's utility and movement abilities? That's actually sort of difficult to answer given all the extra factors we've just established. Maybe we should be comparing Valorant to another game with abilities? Like Overwatch. Much like in Valorant, in Overwatch you have to constantly be aware of what movement and crowd control abilities other characters have. But the movement in Overwatch is much faster and more fluid, so it's not just a matter of predicting where enemies might appear. Usually the enemy you're trying to shoot at is already in full view of you, but they're complicating matters by doing backflips in the air. On top of this, you don't buy guns in Overwatch. Every character has a completely different weapon that shoots in a different way. The two main types are hit scan, weapons that register hits instantly, and projectile, weapons that shoot a projectile with a travel time. Overwatch aim is also much more about tracking, which entails following a moving target with your crosshair, owing to the higher time to kill. Okay, that comparison was a bust too. Probably could have seen that coming. There must be another FPS with a heavy emphasis on movement tech that we can compare with Overwatch. Oh, right. Apex Legends is the king of movement-based shooters. If you think Overwatch's flyers are annoying to aim at, try fighting an Apex player who's mastered the art of sliding, wall jumping, super jumping, hyper jumping, just all kinds of jumping. Apex also has a wide variety of weapons to work with, but unlike Overwatch, Apex is a battle royale. This means that maps are enormous, which means gunfights can happen at any distance, from close-range SMG brawls to long-range sniper duels. So Apex players are often required to be highly adaptable in their aiming styles, since no two games will ever play out in remotely the same way. And there are always going to be 19 other squads, all making different choices and picking up different loot. That seems pretty hard to compare, too. Surely there has to be a pair of FPSs out there that can actually stack up against each other. It isn't possible that all these games in the same genre are so different from one another that you can't even do a fair one-to-one comparison. What about Apex and Quake? Quake is all about movement too, right? Although, no, the weapons and maps are so different. Or maybe CS and Rainbow Six Siege, they're both military-type tactical shooters. No, Rainbow Six's maps and gadgets completely change the way you aim in that game too. Man, this is actually a lot harder than I thought it would be. I thought that aim would be the common point of comparison for all FPSs, but now that I'm really thinking about it, there's all this other stuff that impacts the way you aim. Maybe it's time to change the way we're approaching this question. There have to be some real professionals out there who have the answers we're looking for. Luckily, we at Team Liquid happen to have access to some of the best FPS players in the world. Who better to ask about this question than them?
If I had to pick one, I would probably say CS. People that have been playing that game for years, they really perfected it.
Maybe CSGO. Maybe it's like the most hardest one.
Para mí el número uno es el Rainbow Six.
Yo creo que Apex es el más complicado.
I think Overwatch, to be honest. It's Overwatch or Apex.
Aiming in Counter-Strike, it has the highest skill ceiling.
I think Rainbow Six. I tried to play some death matches and I couldn't kill anyone.
Overwatch or Valorant, because it's kind of like Counter-Strike but with a little bit of Overwatch. I think what sets Overwatch ahead of the rest is the fact that the dodging of everybody is so much faster.
Dude, Quake's pretty hard. I feel like Quake's pretty hard for sure.
I'm not sure in terms of shooting. Maybe CS, just because I played CS a lot. But
Overwatch, to be in terms of using as much aim as possible, like tracking, reactivity and stuff like that.
Valorant has become an absolute just mess of things happening around you.
I'm so biased, I'm gonna say Counter-Strike. CS is extremely hard.
Okay, so as it turns out, pro players are kind of just like the rest of us. They can't agree on anything either. Even players on the same team don't necessarily have the same opinion. So even after all that, we're no closer to figuring out which FPS is the hardest one. I'm starting to wonder, is aim even an objective skill, or is it so specific to each game that good aim doesn't even exist. Does aim even really matter that much in the grand scheme of things? Do all these games even belong in the same genre just because they all involve shooting things with your gun? It would be so simple if there was a game that was just about aiming. A true FPS. One where you don't have to juggle all these other variables, and you can just move your mouse around to shoot targets, like God intended. Hey, wait! While I was doing research for this video, I stumbled upon a sub-community of FPS players that was completely new to me. I've been playing FPSs for about 9 years now, and of course I knew that aim trainers existed, but I never considered just how intense and granular people could get about them. They call themselves the aim community, which is exactly what it sounds like. Most people involved in it got into aim training with the intention of improving at a certain game, but got hooked by the aim trainer itself, to the point where some, though not all, play aim trainers more than they play the games they intended to improve at. You might be wondering what the point of this is. Why do people spend all their time playing a game that isn't even technically a game, just to improve at a skill that doesn't have much application outside of a vacuum? That was my first reaction too, before I accidentally entered a fugue state and spent 2.5 hours straight looking at posts and videos from members of the AIM community. To spare you having to do the same thing, you can hear about it directly from Viscos and Maddie, two prominent members of the AIM community who create educational videos and coach some of your favorite FPS pros.
I think the best comparison I can draw is to speedrunning. You know, what is the point of a Super Mario 64 world record besides just the joy of competing and pushing yourself and seeing yourself get better over time? I think that's what it is for a lot of people who really, really like aim training.
People love speedrunning. People love pushing that time score just a few seconds earlier. And, you know, aim training is the same way. You see the number go up. They just want to push that score just a little bit.
A community built around the satisfaction of making the number go up. What a beautiful concept. In a way, aim training is kind of like going to the gym, although you'll probably get tarred and feathered if you say that kind of thing within earshot of people who actually do go to the gym. It's about refining that specific skill to the point where, when you do play an FPS, there's one element you no longer have to think too hard about. Much like with any relatively niche interest, and very much like speedrunning, hardcore aimers have created a tight-knit community where competition and collaboration go hand in hand.
The competition is less direct, you know, for you to win, someone else does not have to lose. And because of that, you know, I found it easier to kind of make friends with opponents, quote unquote. Whereas in Counter-Strike, you know, I had similar experiences, but it was more adversarial, more rivalry. Haven't really had that in aim training for the most part. There are definitely people who take it way too seriously, but a lot of the top players are really good friends with each other and will if someone thinks of something that is really impactful for a specific scenario, they're not going to gatekeep it to win their next match or something. It's like, I want to talk about this. This is cool. This is a cool discovery.
Viscos and Maddie are both staff members of Voltaic, a community that's basically become synonymous with aim training over the last few years. They've created a ton of different resources around aim improvement, which encompasses areas like aim theory, posture, grip style, and mindset. These resources get really into the weeds of things that the average FPS player doesn't tend to consciously consider. Before I started on this video, I was one of those people. If you asked me about how I aimed, I would have said that I just, do it. And I can generally hold my own in the games I play regularly, but I'm definitely not a world-class aimer. So what better way to understand it than to just do it myself? What you're watching right now is real footage from the first time I ever played KovaaK. I've omitted the very start where I was immediately overwhelmed and forgot that I should be actually shooting the gun, but it was still pretty stressful even after that. Almost as soon as I started, I immediately realized that all that talk about all aim, no brain is a total lie. In an aim trainer, even when there are no enemies, map elements, or abilities to keep track of, your brain is still working at 1,000,000 miles an hour to respond to all the small adjustments you're being presented with. It's not a no-brain activity, it's just shifting your brain into a different gear. One that I was clearly not familiar with. This unfamiliarity sort of stressed me out, and I definitely gripped my mouse way too tight. But as I kept going, I found that I could feel myself getting more used to the exercises. By the time I was done, I felt like I'd actually cleared a hurdle. A very basic starting hurdle, to be clear, but a hurdle nonetheless. And once I wiped all the sweat off my palms, I even felt like I wanted to keep going.
It's a very satisfying skill in a very visceral way that only a very few games in winning alone can kind of live up to that feeling of a good shot within the game. The satisfaction and the gratification of it is more instant, there's more feedback and less tied to outside factors.
I definitely understand the visceral satisfaction of hitting a good shot. Every FPS player has probably had that moment where they hit an amazing shot and felt like adrenaline was being injected directly into their bloodstream. But for me, a lot of the time, those shots can feel like luck.
Oh my god, that was by accident.
Aim training is about building the skills to make those shots happen at will.
You can tell almost when you're feeling sharp, when you're in the zone, when you're hitting all your shots. It's that satisfaction and that feedback that really is the most fun part and why I only play aim trainers so much. It takes that feeling, those dopamine spikes, and it just replicates that over and over and over again, almost until it feels normal. One joke that I make all the time is that my reward system is so messed up from playing so much aim training.
That still doesn't solve the issue we ran into earlier about how FPSs have so many extra factors to consider that aim skills in each game aren't necessarily directly transferable to others. But with aim trainers, you can build a foundation strong enough to be able to adapt to whatever a new game throws at you. To separate the two skill sets, the aim community categorizes the physical skill of aiming as mouse control, with the more holistic act of aiming being, aim.
I think that what aim training does is it directly works on your mouse control, whereas how we have claimed it to be, aim is actually the application of one's mouse control to the systems and to the engine and to the feel of a specific game. So, for example, we can see Counter-Strike players sometimes struggling in Overwatch because it's just a completely different feel of a game. And while their mouse control may be just the same and it might be universally good across the games, it's how they apply it and it's how they feel out the systems that the game is putting them within.
Valorant pros, they have good aim. I don't think that's deniable. I don't think most people would try to debate that. But I wouldn't say at the start they have good aim in Overwatch, right? Because there are so many factors that are kind of working against them. That doesn't change the fact that they have good aim. They just haven't, transferred their good aim over yet. People who have good raw mechanics, either developed through aim trainers or through being really good at one game, will pick up other games faster. They won't spawn in best in the world, but they will be able to adapt quicker.
And listen, there's a reason why people spend hours upon hours honing their aim. It feels good to hit good shots, and it's always satisfying to feel yourself tangibly improving at something. That being said, though, hardcore aimers will also be the first to tell you that aim is not the most important thing in any FPS.
If you're realistically trying to make the most out of a real game, you want to be a well-rounded player. It's very tied to game knowledge and game sense, and I think that aim should realistically be taking a back seat to that knowledge. When I say that, I obviously still say that you still do need aim, but it's definitely not the most important thing to consider.
In your expert opinion, what actually is the hardest FPS? You have to choose one.
Oh my gosh, okay. I'm gonna go Quake duels. I don't think it's pushed as hard, but I think in terms of the variety of mechanical demands it makes on you, as well as things like power-up management, moving around the map. It's a 1v1, you have no teammates to rely on or bring you down. That's gotta be my vote, but I don't think it is an answerable question.
I want to say Overwatch, but the answer that I would couple with it is actually Quake. It's basically FPS chess. It's playing this big mind game against whoever you're against and messing with their timings and outpacing them in terms of movement.
I do feel like Quake is kind of like the aimer's answer, the real knower's answer. So maybe it is just Quake after all. Should have known. The oldest game is always the hardest one. I guess we can end the video right here then. No, we didn't go through all that to just declare that there actually is one single right answer. Even if Quake is very difficult, and Rafa is a humble king for declining to say his own game is the hardest one. I think the answer is still up in the air. It really depends on what part of gaming you think is hardest. Sometimes the difficulty even comes from something as simple as just not liking the way it plays, and not being willing to invest time into getting better. Some of the minutiae of aim training definitely gets a little intense. There have been cheating scandals where perceived high-level aimers have cheated on their KovaaK runs just for the social prestige. A Reddit thread I particularly enjoyed features aimers discussing their tips for entering a flow state, which include reading self-help books and eating pure cacao. When you see stuff like that, you may be tempted to return to the question of why people bother to do all this for an aim trainer and not a real game. But if you think about it, in a way, maybe aim trainers are the purest FPSs of them all. They strip away all the other considerations and focus entirely on the basics of the genre. They can be the hardest FPS, or they can be the easiest. What you make of it is entirely up to you. When you really consider the breadth of all the FPS games out there, sometimes it feels crazy to even group them all together. How can you even find a common language between all of these different FPSs when the only thing all of them have in common changes completely in context? But maybe that's just it. The question we've posed can only really be answered by the individual, because everybody has a different relationship to the games they play. Even pros who are all on the same team don't necessarily agree when it comes to which FPSs are the hardest. So, yeah, you clicked on this video because you probably already had an answer in mind or you were looking for one. I'm sorry to tell you that this is a question without an answer. It's just not possible to know. But I think there's something kind of beautiful about that there's so much depth and variance in this genre of games that outsiders tend to lump together as being the same, just because they're all about shooting people with your gun. What, you're still here? Okay, fine, the hardest game is Counter-Strike. That's what you wanted to hear, right? Well, there you go. You can like the video now.